who are some rappers that you grew up with? Because there's so much talent that just came out of New York since the 80s and 90s. Who were some of the people that influenced you that you just kind of was like, man?
Coming up, I grew up on a lot of the OG foundational MC/rappers in hip hop. Groups like Cold Crush Brothers, Fantastic Five Freaks, Treacherous 3, obviously Run DMC. They were huge influences on me because they were from Queens.
Yeah.
LL Cool J, Fat Boys, Fantasy 3, Soul Sonic Force.
Yeah.
You know, I was born in that first decade of hip hop, and I was lucky enough to have an older brother that was immersing himself in that renaissance that was taking place in the first 10 years of what we know to be now as hip hop. So my brother would educate me on who the dope rappers were, who the dope DJs were, who the dope breakers were. During the break, you and I were talking about how breakers don't get enough attention, you know, in hip hop. And with it being the 50th year of hip hop, I feel like more shows like this that are based around hip hop culture need to show love and highlight the breaker, because that element of hip hop, as I was saying to you during the break, is responsible for introducing this culture to the world. It wasn't rappers that introduced hip hop to the world. It wasn't DJs even, and I'm a DJ saying this. It was breakers in movies like Flashdance and documentaries like Star Wars and Hollywood films like Beat Street and Breakin'. Right. You know, breakers were the original stars of this culture, and for some reason now in 2023, no one is talking about that element. Right. You know, and I find that very curious. And I know why. You know, I know that hip-hop isn't controlled by the same people that controlled it the first 10 years of its infancy. But that said, whether you're a booking agent or you manage groups or you are an owner of a platform like this or whatever it is that you do with regards to this culture, I think it's important to educate yourself and know that hip-hop isn't just a rapper. You know, it's not just Biggie Smalls or Tupac. That's one element of a bigger pot, you know, that makes up the salad that we call hip-hop, which is breaking, graffiti, DJing, MCing. And then for me, there's a fifth element, which is the party people, the people that come out and give the energy that the breakers feed off and the rappers feed off and the DJs feed off. Without the party people, there's no hip hop party. You know what I'm saying? So like, you know, these are things that like I be sitting on, like wanting to talk about, because I see from my house, you know, I'm scrolling through my phone and see a little podcast with like a hip hop artist, and they're just talking about rappers and who their favorite top 10 rappers are. And it's like, it gives off the impression that the only element that's worthy of being talked about in hip hop is the rapper element. And there are three other elements that make up the culture as well. And it's important to show love to all four equally.
Right. It's all about relevance.
Yeah, relevance, man, and respect. Yeah. You know?
Following the timeline, right? You know, you have the birthday, right? If 1973, right?
August 11, 1973, Cedric Avenue was the birthday of hip-hop.
Right. But I also know, and it's pretty popular, and it's I don't know, I'm still got to speak with people that were there or were around. You know, it really didn't, hip-hop didn't break out until 78, 79, right? Rappers Delight, right? So within that, like, 6 years, you know, like, there's MCs in the party. I wonder what that time was like, of just kind of the culture developing on its own and it not being this mass-consumed thing.
One thing that we got to think about and acknowledge is the fact that the precursor to it was gang culture. This is very important information, and I'm going to use this platform to disseminate it, right? And you cut me off whenever you have to. But in New York City and other parts of the country in the late 60s and early 70s, there was a government plan called benign neglect that was implemented by Richard Nixon,
straight facts,
who's the president. And the advisor of Nixon was a guy named Patrick Moynihan. He was an advisor to the president, and he basically told the president, like, yo, the time may have come where the issue of race could benefit from a period of benign neglect. So basically what that means is they were like, if we're not succeeding in regulating the black issue, you know, poverty, quote unquote dysfunction, which we could get into later on, let's just ignore it and let it fix itself. So what happened was in the Bronx, they stopped funding the communities. Parallel to that, slumlords, the people that own these buildings, that the Puerto Ricans,
the housing,
the housing departments, and the landlords that own these buildings, that were seeing the Polish people, the Irish people flee, and the landlords couldn't raise the rent on them. They started burning down their buildings to try to get the blacks and Latinos to leave, because they wanted to gentrify the Bronx the way Brooklyn, New York City has become gentrified. And there's areas of Harlem right now that have become gentrified. They were trying to do that in the 70s in the Bronx. But the thing about it is the blacks and Latinos that were there were on some, we're not leaving. You could burn the buildings. We're going to fix up the apartments within the buildings and
adapt.
Squat and adapt. Exactly. And I always say Latinos and black folk are the most resourceful races on this planet, man. You put them anywhere and they'll figure out a way to survive.
Amen.
And that's what happened in the Bronx. And so because of this policy of benign neglect, it's like the planets aligned, man, and there was the perfect space for what happened, which was this renaissance that took place between these different cultures, black culture and Latino culture, mixing together the music. So you had Latinos and black kids together experiencing salsa music, merengue music, cumbia, but then also soul, funk, jazz, right? Whatever Irish people that might have stayed back, that didn't leave, there was the influence that they brought to the table, you know, rock. And so that's why hip hop, those first 10 years, although there were no record labels releasing hip hop records, when you would go to a hip hop party, the music was an amalgamation of different types of genres of music, because the DJs played the music that was just being played on the radio. There wasn't, it's not like you went to a park jam and thought, I'm at a hip hop party.
Right.
That's why sometimes I struggle a little when people say the first hip hop party was in 1973, August 11th, Kool Herc, because the people that were there didn't call it a hip hop party. It was just,
it was already something going down.
It was just something going down, a party, and people like Herc, Africa Bambaataa, Grandmaster Flash, Jazzy J, Red Alert, Theodore would play music, any kind of music, any genre, it didn't matter, so long as it had the kind of energy that would inspire the breakers to break, you know, and the party people to have fun.
Teach, like the first, I'll put James Brown, you know, giving out about clap your feet, everybody get up, and they'll do it, and I'll run through a bunch of soul, funk, and everything. I'm like, look, this was the hip hop party for 6 to 7 years. This was the party.
That was
Before
the party.
Records,
Right.
This was the music everybody party.
Right.
Even back in the days on the the radio stations like 92 KTU and stuff like that. Like every radio station back then, they played an infusion of music. They played. You heard rock, you heard disco, you could hear funk on one station. You know, everything, all different types of music on that one station before they started separating and rock needs to be played here. Right. Or this needs to be played over here. Back then, all types of music were played on one station. You can hear every type on one station.
And that's what hip hop is. That's what hip hop is. Hip hop, to answer your question, the first 10 years of hip hop, it was an amalgamation of different genres, different perspectives of dance. That's why breaking, or before we knew it to be breaking, it was referred to as rocking. And even before rocking, they called it burning. Like, you would dance and do a move and like embarrass someone that you were kind of competing against. And they called it burning. Yeah, right, exactly. But it's important to like touch on this, even though this isn't like a, you know, classic hip hop maybe podcast, right? But it's important to touch on it because there are people watching that like are taking in all of this like hoopla, 50th anniversary, but all they know is Tupac and Biggie.
Right.
You know what I mean? And my thing is like, yo, hip hop is so deep, and where it comes from, in some ways it's sort of sad because it really comes from rubble and poverty, kids that like were disenfranchised. So again, like there was this messed up environment, but then within that, like a phoenix, we were just in Phoenix, like a phoenix out of the ashes came this culture that they weren't even calling a culture, that now is known to be hip hop. And it was young kids putting on parties because they couldn't go to clubs. So they would throw parties in abandoned buildings and burned down buildings. They would throw parties in park jams and get electricity from lampposts.
Yes.
Like resourcefulness, dude. And that's what created hip hop. And so for me to wrap up, I feel the first 10 years of this culture are so important. And it's sad to me that these concerts, these events that are taking place throughout the country that are celebrating 50 years of hip hop are only talking about or acknowledging or celebrating the last 25 really, and not the full 50, because the way this started and how we ended up here is deep, bro. It's so deep. And like we would need another 2 hours to really touch on everything, man. But like it's really deep and it's important to talk about because no one is really, touching on it.